Hey everyone, this is Car Ray Rob.
Where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob. And we want to welcome you to our podcast. Say hello to my little film.
Hey there, it'll be just a little while till Ray and Rob spit their spittle. Come on, check out of the hospital. So grab some of your best peanut brittle. This will be a darn good transmittal. And say hello to my little film.
All right, everybody, we are back with another episode of Say Hello to My Little Film. On this podcast, I introduce Rob, or at least this week, introduce Rob. Sometimes he does it to me too. I introduce Rob a movie he's never seen before that I love, and I'll see if I can get him to like it as much as I do. Are you ready for this, Rob?
I'm always game, so let's do it.
Yeah, so usually we don't really ever too often think about having to be timely with this podcast, but I kind of am with this one.
Are you?
We just finished up March Madness here in the States.
That's true.
So I am going to center around a basketball movie.
I mean, you've been wanting to show me a sports movie for a while.
I got Breaking Away
first
last
season.
year. So I do try to get one sports movie, but
there's
there's limited lists because
that's true.
The podcast says you cannot have seen the movie I'm presenting.
I can't count the number of text messages I get from it. Have you seen this sports movie?
Have you seen Rudy?
I have seen. You know how many times I've seen Rudy?
Yes. But so it's timing that way. So it is a basketball movie.
Okay. I've seen Blue Chips, if that's what you mean.
I've asked you that.
Yeah, I've asked me that.
Love to rewatch it. But and then I'm also tapping into something we've never done on this podcast before.
Oh.
I'm going to tap into a passion of mine that I've been trying to find the right movie to do, and it's never struck me till now.
Okay.
And that is, I'm bringing in a documentary.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, that is interesting.
So I'm doing a sports movie.
Is it a crime doc?
And a doc.
Is it a crime doc?
It is not.
It's not a crime doc. Basketball crime doc.
Crimes do occur in it in a way.
Okay. Well, now I'm super interested. Okay. So Ray, you got to tell me, what do you got?
What do you got? What do you got? What do you got?
All right, Rob, what I got is 1994 Hoop Dreams.
Hoop Dreams. I am familiar with this movie, and I was not aware there were crimes in it.
Kind of.
Okay.
They're like, they happen in the background.
Okay. Well, I am aware. As I said, I am aware of Hoop Dreams. It's one I've heard of many, many times, but never seen. I must admit, full disclosure, I like documentaries. I'm not as good at watching them as I feel like I should be.
I love documentaries. I watch a bunch of crime docs. The problem with documentaries is they don't usually have really good resolutions because, and this is some stuff I want to talk about in the after part, but you can't control how the story's going to end.
Right.
And especially in a crime doc, you can't find a lot of times they can't find the murderer.
Right.
So the ending isn't really fulfilling in a lot of ways. So you kind of you have all this build up to just a womp womp kind of thing with docs sometimes. This one I think has a payoff. I do think the story works out in a unique way.
Okay.
That I think teaches you a lot. I think like a lot of good docs. All right, this is a basketball doc, but it's going to touch on a lot of real life stuff more than just basketball and just like I said, I don't want to give too much away. So this is the story. I know you said you're familiar in case people aren't. This basically follows in real time for 4 years two high school basketball players from their freshman year on.
Uh-huh. I actually wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, from their freshman year on, all 4 years of their lives.
Okay.
It kind of charts their journey. The doc doesn't interject anything. It just records real life.
Interesting. Okay, I did not realize this doc took place over 4 years.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Yeah, probably more if you just count maybe a little bit before they start ninth grade and a little bit after they graduate high school. So, probably close to 5, honestly. And I know this is the Hoop Dreams came out in 1994, but the last year of filming was 1991. So this movie actually starts in the 80s.
Oh,
and
wow.
goes to the 90s, and then it came out 4 years later, as it 3.5 years, I think it
Okay.
was 94, 95. So yeah, somewhere around 4 years later. So it was directed by Steve James. He's gone on to do a lot of 30 for 30s with ESPN. 30 for 30s is
That
like
makes
kind of their
sense.
most classic,
Sure.
sports doc show. So of course, he had a ton of success there.
That makes sense.
It wasn't nominated for Academy Award, which did bring up some outcry, but it is what it is. But there's some other things I'll talk about in the after section. But yeah, it's real life. You kind of get hooked up with these two kids and their families, and you just get to see how the world treats potential basketball stars. So it's pretty interesting.
Okay. Well, no, I'm excited to see it. Like I said, I'm familiar with it. I'm glad I get to watch a documentary and be better about watching them. And one that
this I will say, this is a long one. So
wait, how long?
We are going to be pushing 3 hours.
Oh my god! Well, I mean, it is over 4 years, so
Yeah,
I guess
that's
that
true.
makes sense. But I also did not realize it was that long. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, Ray and I are going to go watch a 3-hour documentary about kids trying to play basketball.
Yes.
Professionally.
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough.
Trying to get to the
Trying
professional
to get
level.
to the professional level. If you have not seen Hoop Dreams, this is where we ask you to pause the podcast and go spend the next 3 hours watching Hoop Dreams, and then come back and spend maybe another hour with us.
Yeah, we're going to have to keep it tight.
We'll see how we can do. And we'll find out what I thought of Hoop Dreams.
Ray and Rob are currently watching the film. You may be also watching the film. If you're not, then you're listening to me say that Ray and Rob are watching the film. They'll be right back when they're done watching the film.
Man, that was that was quite the roller coaster.
For
Ray.
3 hours. You ain't kidding.
It was a long roller coaster, but man, it you know what kind of surprised me though at first when it was kind of starting is the style of it.
Yeah.
Like documentaries obviously changed a lot over the years, but this felt very TV. The aspect ratio,
Well,
and like the way
yeah.
and the way it was
Yeah,
filmed.
it was meant to be a TV show, actually. I
Oh,
think,
really?
Yeah, I do think that originally this was planned to be like a 30-minute PBS special. That's what, and that's why it's filmed with a video camera, like a
Right.
1990s just over the shoulder
yeah,
video
like
camera
I said.
that your dad would use to record Christmas morning, and that's really all they had funding for.
Uh-huh.
And then they just got a little bit more funding, and they're like, well, maybe we should kind of take this a little further. And then they did another year, and then they got after 2 years, they're like, this is really something, and they got a lot of funding after that. And that's kind of why the first 2 years is only 41 minutes. The last 2 years is
Right.
2 hours and 10 minutes, because that's when the money started to come in, and they could actually do something with the
Sure.
with the
and I guess I could
budget.
definitely see that too, thinking about it, because like if you think about like how the games are shot,
Yeah.
like later in the doc compared to like everything early on in the doc, yeah, you could see that they probably had a little bit of a nicer camera,
Yeah, a little more
bit,
cameras. They had a
you're
camera in the
right.
audience, camera on the court, probably multiple
Right.
cameras on the court.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that isn't okay. That makes a lot of sense now. But yeah, I mean, it is a crazy story, and like for being over 4 years and just not knowing what lies ahead, especially like you said,
Right.
when it's supposed to start as like a 30-minute thing, and you go on to 4 years with these two kids,
Yeah.
like they really kind of just stumbled into this.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I love about docs, and I'm always like, fascinated with docs, is like, is luck inherent in this medium? Like when you start a documentary, you do not know how it's going to end, right? Like unlike
Sure, it's
some,
not inherent, but
or I mean needed, I guess I should say.
yeah.
Is it needed to be successful in this medium? Because I just think this movie, it plays out so perfectly, where like these two main characters, and I'll actually talk about how they found these main characters in a sec, but like they just like their lives yin and yang so perfectly for this doc. Like maybe not
Yeah.
perfectly for them. I'm sure that they could
No,
have had
definitely
it go a little
not,
bit better,
yeah.
but it yin and yang so perfectly for this doc that it just makes a super compelling story. But like none of that had to happen. It's real life. So like so many times this doc could have gone off the rails if one of these events doesn't happen, but they do, and it ends up making the perfect doc in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely correct on that. I mean, I've definitely heard stories of other docs that have stumbled onto something where it's like they started filming one thing and then something completely different happens and it becomes something else entirely, or just, you know, augments the story in a completely different way.
Right. Yeah. I actually think one of those 8 docs that came out on HBO last year, I think that I talked about in my What Was I Watching, I think had the same thing where they started doing something and something else happened that took it down a different path.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and especially when you're doing that kind of stuff, like investigative,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. I could definitely see it happening a lot with that. But, you know, when you're dealing with this kind of subject matter, you've got these 2 kids. Let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, how did they find William and Arthur?
So you actually watched it happen live. So, like, you know, we start off following, I think his name was Arthur, or was his name Arthur too? The
so many Arthurs in this movie.
Who was the recruiter guy that, like, found Arthur, the player, on the court?
Is it Arthur?
I don't. I had Earl, not Arthur. Earl. So the film crew of this movie went with Earl. Like, when Earl was going on the court, and it looks like he's finding Arthur. He was finding Arthur for this doc too. Oh. They were like, "Who are we gonna follow?" And he's like, "I'll find a kid for you. Let's go out there and hunt." And so. Right. He's like, then he's talking about, hey, I guarantee this kid's gonna be good. Like, you'll be hearing from this kid in 4 years. Like, he was telling that to the crew, like, film him because you will be seeing him in 4 years. And so Arthur, he was right. So then, and at that time, the crew did not realize this was going to be a 4-year movie.
Well, fair enough, right.
And then when Earl takes Arthur to that basketball camp with that Isaiah Thomas shows up to, and we meet Coach Pingatore for the first time.
Right.
Again, it's actually in the dialogue where, like, basically Coach Pingatore says, you know, Arthur's good. I don't know if I see, like, that confidence.
Right.
But, like, you know who is good is this William Gates. And that's basically what Coach was saying. I think you should make this doc not on Arthur. I think you should make it about William Gates. Like, this other kid that's coming here, he's really good.
Right.
And so then you know, director Steve James was like, all right, well, we'll follow both of them, I guess. And that's just how, like, you actually watch how the director found these kids, and it's just like, it's so lucky.
Yeah, seriously, that's insane. You got to think, you know, especially, you know, when you're dealing with these recruiter guys that go out there and they probably see dozens of these kids, you know, trying to, you know, recruit for this high school or that high school or whatever. And, you know, it's, you know, finding that diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously the name of the game.
But
there's no guarantee.
No.
You know, even if you see somebody that you think is going to be good.
Absolutely. And sometimes you don't handle the diamond properly and you break it. And you talk about if that happens in this movie or not. But there's so much to touch on, Rob. The movie, because this long-form storytelling, it touches on these kids over the course of 4 years, and there's so much in their lives that it's sprinkled in there that you just get these little commentaries on. Again, that's why I love this doc, because it's a basketball movie, but it's not just basketball. There's so much that it talks in. And these 2 kids are by far and away the leads, but you do get attached to their family members too. So let's talk about family and how this.
Let's compartmentalize it. I agree. Yeah, family.
Let's start there, because this is you know, it's high school. It's a very influential time, and maybe the most influential time in a young one's life.
Yeah.
And so you got these 2 kids who they're both going, as the movie starts their freshman year, they're both going to St. Joe's, a super nice public or private school.
Yeah, very private.
Private school. And
expensive.
Expensive. And their families are, you know, they're struggling.
Yeah.
And this is their way out. Literally, they are it takes them an hour and a half to get to school and an hour and a half to get back. They are literally going out.
That blew my mind, man. 3 hours round trip every day.
I'll just get my homework done on the train.
But, seriously.
But it's, again, you're plucking kids out of their natural environment, putting them in this private, you know, quite honestly, it's all white, and essentially for these 2 characters, like, they're having to assimilate into a completely different environment than they're used to. And they have this pressure of, this is my way the family's getting out. So I mean, how do you feel?
I mean,
about
absolutely, absolutely. There's so many dynamics to the family on both sides, William and Arthur, and, you know, they're similar and different all at the same time. You know, you've got there's the unintended, or, you know, intended, unintended. You know, I think it maybe differs between each character, but there's that pressure of you're going to save us.
You're going to make it.
You're going to make it. You know, I just know I just know he'll make it. Like I know that was one of the lines. I can't remember if that was Arthur's mom or
I think it was
William's mom. Yeah. Who said like I just know he'll make it. You know, that's a lot of pressure, you know, when you think, okay, I'm going to be the one to save my family, to get us out of this terrible living situation. I'm going to be the one to save us.
Yeah.
And then you've got that level. And then you've got the people who, you know, have had their own failings, like Curtis or Bo, that, you know, are trying to pretty much live vicariously through their brother / son, and it's two separate instances. And, you know, it's got to be hard. You know, these kids, they want to be kids. But I will say it seemed like the dream, at least in the beginning, was genuinely theirs. It's not like, you know, they're like, you need to learn how to play basketball. You need to go to the NBA. You need to do this. It is, at least in these two instances, it seems like they are genuinely their dream.
Yes, it's their passion. Where nowadays you feel like there's a lot of things where like parents are putting kids into special training at 4 years old to make them become Olympic gymnasts or the next phenom golfer or whatever.
Well, yeah, and you've coached in the past for a long time. You coached, so you've seen it all in that regard. It was football, not basketball, but I'm sure the parents are exactly the same in that regard. So you've seen all of this type of thing.
Yes, to every degree possible, where it's just it's not healthy for the kids, where there's where there is good balance here. And where did you think the parents fell here? Did you think they had good balance? Because I will say, I think Curtis doesn't. Like, I think Curtis doesn't have bad intentions, but he puts unneeded pressure on William. I think William has a great quote at one point, like, everybody has to be my coach. Everybody thinks they have to be my coach.
Yeah.
Where what I really think he's saying there is, I wish they would be my fans.
Right.
I wish they would just support me and not, like, when I come home, like, Coach Pingatore is telling him everything he did wrong. We can notice that, like, in the doc. He doesn't need to come home and then hear it from you for the second or third time. Like, well, just pat him on the back.
Well, and sometimes even Curtis doesn't like Pingatore, because I remember there was like times where he's like, it's just bad coaching.
Yeah.
Like when they benched him, like late in the game or late in the documentary, like when
the semifinal game or something,
senior year or whatever, and he was like, just bad coaching. It was just bad coaching. That's what it was. So everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah.
But I think the moms were both Arthur and William's moms were both very much were fans.
Yeah.
I think they were fans. I think Curtis was the coach. I think Bo was mostly a coach when he was there, which again, kind of going through that
Bo's
roller coaster of Arthur's life.
Bo's issue, Arthur's dad, was not that he was, like, I think, putting undue pressure on Arthur. It's just that he had no stability as a human being, as a parent.
Right.
Nothing, not associated with basketball. Just if Arthur was just a normal kid going to school every day, Bo would be an unreliable parent for him no matter what.
Right, absolutely.
But yeah, the moms, I think, were home base.
Yeah, and I think that was, at least as a viewer, I was happy about that for them, because I felt like at least it was some kind of an anchor.
I thought Arthur's mom she got more screen time, but
she did.
Definitely hard not to just be a fan of hers. She had some blunt honesty at times. Again, when you get to touch on other things, you touch on a lot of things through Arthur's mom, because they talk about economics and living on welfare through Arthur's mom and her struggles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And again, kind of we just said, the ups and downs of Arthur's life. I mean, the way that his life plays out in these 4 years compared to William, it seems night and day in some instances and not in others. But I mean, Arthur clearly had the bigger struggle at home. First off, even taking St. Joe's and being, forced to leave St. Joe's out of it.
Can we talk trash about St. Joe's in a little bit?
Oh, we're definitely going to. Believe me, I'm going to get around to that. Don't you worry. But yeah, I mean, the fact that, his father ends up leaving, ends up going to jail for a stint, having to do rehab. And then his mom
addicted to crack, which we see him buy,
which we see him buy on
in
film.
front of
like,
Arthur.
Bo, there's a camera, man. Like, come on, it's there, and your son is watching.
Jesus.
What are you doing? But then his mom, ends up having to go on welfare, and trying to dig herself out, and they're having trouble paying the bills. The power gets turned off, the gas gets turned
Yeah.
off. I mean, all these things.
And they touch on when Arthur turns 18, even though he's still
Yeah.
going to school, they take him off
They take him
public
off aid, so
which
like,
makes no sense
and
either.
exactly,
It's
and
like,
his
come on,
mom's
people.
not able to do it because Bo's still not really part of the picture there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, it's insane, what he had to put,
Yeah.
to
And
try
when they
to
mentioned that
survive
Bo
and
was
overcome, they
physically
both did.
abusive to his mom too, that
Right.
Arthur had seen.
Yeah.
We learned that through Shannon, who's Arthur's best friend.
Right. So
And Arthur's best friend goes to jail for selling drugs.
Right. Eventually, Shannon is.
When will it stop raining?
Right, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, these kids, unfortunately, are caught in this cycle, and it's
Yeah.
like, how do you break it?
Right.
How do you break it? And for Will and Arthur, in this case, his was basketball. He was like,
Yep.
this is how I'm going to do it, or how I'm going to try to break the cycle.
Yeah.
And
I think you can look at Arthur and then be very easy, as you watch him through 4 years, be like, work harder, like study more,
Yeah.
like just do this and you'll be good, you'll be successful. But it's hard. That's when you don't factor in just everything, like all these like walls that are put up around him. That
yeah,
there's so much to overcome. It's not just go home and study because I went home to study, but there was no power.
Right.
Or I went home to study and my parents were in a giant fight.
Right.
And it's not as simple as go study and you'll do better. Like that's not life.
Right. Well, and then, so let's circle back now to St. Joe's, which is kind of, seemed like is like the beacon on the hill almost.
Right.
Like that's what's going to launch me off, whether
Yeah.
you're William, whether you're Arthur, whatever, going to St.
The
Joe's.
school that
being
Isaiah
successful.
Thomas went
Right,
to.
the school that Isaiah Thomas went to, that's what's going to, project me into the right college that's going to get me into the, onto the right program that's going to get me to the NBA.
Right.
And, obviously for Arthur, that didn't work. I mean, within a year, it's basically
Less than a year.
It's coming off the rails, and then kids get pushed out.
Yeah.
From this school. Then he ends up in Marshall public school, which he does his best.
Yeah.
To get through, and he does well in the program. Like
Yeah.
on the team.
Absolutely does. Well, let's talk about why he got kicked out. Though.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about
Because it
why
was
he got
nothing of
kicked
his own
out.
making. Like, but apparently, his family was behind on paying tuition.
Right.
And essentially they kicked him out.
Right.
Now, he was recruited to go there and
Yep.
given a scholarship.
Yep.
But the mom mentions, like, yes, we knew we were going to pay half, but we were not told that we were going to have to pay for all the transportation. Well, he's taking an hour and a half train there and
Right.
back. That's not cheap.
Nope.
He has to pay for all his own books and stuff.
Yep.
That's not cheap.
Nope.
So, like, it's almost like, and I think the moms expressed it, they felt, and, maybe you can ask more questions up front, but they felt kind of tricked into
Yeah.
how much money or how cheap this would be.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally fair for her to question them on that.
Yeah.
And when they give him no latitude about paying, about when this should be paid, when William can't afford it either.
Right.
And William somehow gets a magic fairy.
Right. Who swoops in, the Encyclopedia
Yeah.
Britannica people.
Yeah. to pay his scholarship.
Yeah.
But that you can, I mean, obviously that lady, Mrs. Weir, was told to pay for William.
Right.
And so St. Joe's or Coach Pingatore, whoever set that up.
Yeah.
Nobody set that up for Arthur because essentially, and they stated in the doc, and I agree, they didn't think he was going to be good enough to get that kind of money from somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, again, it's questionable. You never know. There's probably some gray area, whatever, about whether or not his family was lied to. I know
Sure.
we circle back to Earl later in the movie, and like that's a pretty honest moment.
I love that.
Yeah, where he's talking about that time of being a recruiter and like, how the backlash that he got from his community about, swooping these boys out of the inner city, taking them out to St. Joe's.
Right.
And like what happened to some of them, which makes me think that Arthur wasn't the only case
Sure.
that this happened to.
They probably bring in 5 or 6 kids a year to make their basketball and football teams well. And when they don't, and they kick out the ones they don't like.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I mean, in many instances, I'm sure it ends up completely destroying their school career. I mean, it almost did to to Arthur, because he was out for 2 months because they kept suspending him for non-payment and whatnot.
Right.
And then, when he finally was able to land in public school, he had been out of school for 2 months.
Right.
And he was like a full credit or two behind.
Well, they didn't release his transcript.
Well, and then you get to that point where you're like in junior year, they won't release his transcripts because they still owed him. Or his family still supposedly owed St. Joe's like $1,800 or something like that. So then they have to go do a payment plan just to be able to get this kid's poor kid's transcript. So he can. I'm sorry, I'm getting worked up, but like I mean, it's freaking ridiculous. And again, this is why private school is questionable at best, and that's me being very politically correct.
God bless you, but yeah. I mean, and I will just say I'm going to say something good about St. Joe's in a sec, but I will say this, in regards to Earl first when he was opening up. Actually, let me go back to that first. First, I'll say the people at St. Joe's do not know how to talk to African Americans in the 90s.
God, I know.
Every conversation with the teacher was just super awkward and
Very
weird.
awkward.
Like when William came back from Marquette, and that one teacher was there like, so did you meet any higher black people?
Right.
And William was like, what? He's like, the black people that are high up on the campus. How do they treat black people there? Right. It's like, what? Shut up, dude. Yeah. And William's like, they give them everything they want.
Right.
Like the guy, like, no, I mean, I don't know what he acted like. He thought like they were still in segregation times or something. It was really weird. And then when Arthur's family was going back to like pay back the debt, and this dude who's like, I'm just here to help people, and was acting like you're not giving them any kind of discount. You literally just hit divide by 6 on your calculator. Said you can pay $180 a month. Like you're not helping them. You're just So I mean, it just I just thought these people were just. And then when like Bo's like trying to be really helping Arthur's dad, like hugging the guy at the end. The guy like will barely hug him. It felt totally awkward. So these people at St. Joe's were weird. But I will say, going back to Earl, who had these like regrets about sending kids like Arthur there. Like I do think he had good intentions. Like I don't like it wasn't like he was making millions of dollars from St. Joe's and it was like literally just bringing lambs to slaughter. You know what I mean? Like there are examples, and Isaiah Thomas was obviously the most famous one where this really worked, and really William to a degree you can't argue it doesn't work either. In some instances, he does go to Division I college, and also I think just to comment, I guess the one good thing I'll say about St. Joe's overall would be like, William, they said in 9th grade came in at a 4th grade level.
Yeah.
And he left 9th grade at level.
Right.
Like that's really like that. And a lot of that's on William, but like that's credit to the school too for getting him caught up.
Sure.
So like it was working for William, but what they said for Arthur, he didn't increase his at all.
Well, exactly. And that's always kind of the rub when you're talking about a private school situation like this, because it's like, okay, yeah, the private school is better because they're extremely well funded. They're basically, squeezing every penny they can out of every one of these kids and their parents, whereas a private school or a public school has to scratch and claw for every penny they can try to get, and they're usually, losing half of that penny that they're able to scratch back anyway from, and it's so yes, I mean, I don't disagree that obviously, St. Joe's was a good school. But and
that it was going to work for some people.
And it was going to work for some
like
people.
In Earl, and really, I'm just saying that not even in defense of St. Joe's. I'm saying that in defense of Earl. You know what I mean? I just think
no, and I could, I mean, I definitely can understand that. I mean, and it's hard, because, and again, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier about this idea of like how do you break the cycle? I'm sure for Earl in his mind is thinking I'm possibly giving this kid or this kid that chance to do that, and so it's hard. Obviously he, like you said, he was kind of accused of like getting money out of it. I mean, who knows, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't.
I'm sure he was paid something.
Yeah, but like it's hard because obviously he wants kids to succeed, I would imagine, as a recruiter.
And kind of just going back to what I said earlier about like, so to be a successful doctor, there's some luck that you just have to attain. And I do think storytelling wise, like this is I don't know if this was best for Arthur or not, but storytelling wise, it's great for the doc that I think they get split up.
I agree.
Like it's a perfect like act
sure.
one.
I mean, yeah.
Shift,
I mean, you don't want to like
because
again, you don't want to be like, man, your life is really interesting because it's so bad. Like,
you're going through a lot of struggles. This is perfect content.
This is great.
No, yeah, but like the movie was in their minds, Arthur and William were going to be teammates for maybe 4 years. However, I said that
right,
right. They
yeah,
made the movie kind of 1 year at a time, but they planned on Arthur and William being teammates. They never are.
yeah,
They get split up after the first year, and then we get to see the yin and yang, where William going up through private school, Arthur growing up through public school,
yeah,
and how it affects their lives.
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about William, because we've just talked a lot about
Yeah.
Arthur and his struggles. And William does have his own struggles. Now, he doesn't have to struggle financially as much because, again, he's kind of got that guardian angel, if you will, like
Yes.
paying his tuition and all of that stuff. He doesn't necessarily have to worry about that. But this does kind of go to, we never did really postulate a question for this episode, but, one thing that you kind of hinted and maybe even danced around a little bit is like, is this a bit of a business?
Right.
You know what I mean? Are these kids seen as a commodity? And I think in certain regards with William, like I think it kind of bears true that they are in some regards seen that way. He does falter to injury, which does happen to, unfortunately, way too many of young people like that are athletes that are trying to achieve these higher levels, and that it ends up not being catastrophic, but still a lingering effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, I think one of the most heartbreaking moments for William is when he does go through that, have experienced that knee injury, and you can just see when the doctor tells him like, you're not playing this year. He was just like, what? And it hits a little different nowadays, because we think of like ACL injuries are bad injuries, but you can recover from them in 9 months and be fine. But that wasn't the case in 1990.
Yeah.
Like you had an ACL injury, there's a 50-50 chance your knee was going to be put on backwards when you came out of the surgery.
Sure.
So there was a lot there and there was the rehab wasn't going to be easy, because like the surgeons, like it wasn't like these little 3-dot like arthroscopic, like it was like they're cutting you open and they're digging in there, and
right.
So one of the things I was wondering is like every time they showed William rehabbing, it was in a really nice facility. I'm like, who's paying for this?
Right. You find out the school's insurance.
Yeah, the school's paying for the surgeries and the rehabs.
Right. Which is a good byproduct of that he didn't have to be saddled with that cost. But as I said, kind of said a bit ago about being a commodity, it's like, well, this is how you take care of that commodity.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Or if William wasn't as good, would they have just said, "Oh, you're not going to make, we're not paying for this," or this is going to be added to your tuition, you got to pay, whatever. Like, no, maybe they would have put that cost on a different player.
Right.
But they knew they needed William, so they took care of their commodity, like you said.
But there are those lingering effects, as I said. He feels when he comes back, he kind of feels lost on the team.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like he's been replaced.
Yeah. And that's something that they deal with at every level when there's injury like that. Like you aren't part of the team, because the coaches like have to get your backups ready. Like his name not being on the scoreboard. I don't necessarily know why they did that, unless it's an old scoreboard and there's only so many slots. You know what I mean? So it's like it's not like it's an LED board like nowadays where you could just have an infinite amount of names.
Right.
So times are different, but like totally get that isolation when like, all right, your team's practicing and you're at rehab, or your team's playing games and you're sitting in the second row watching. Like, you don't feel part of the team, and that seclusion can be really mentally draining. I do see that think that you see that in William.
Definitely. And then obviously on the academic side, his test scores start slipping.
Yeah.
After injury and all of that, because he has caught up quite a bit, like you said, being at St. Joe's, but he starts falling behind again, and that is, and I will say, at least in that regard, for Arthur and William both, like there was that focus on academics, like even, as they're, getting into junior and senior year and colleges start come knocking and that kind of thing, like the talk of academics is there.
Yeah.
Having to score certain, things and all of that on
and
ACTs
I can tell you the teams that I've coached on, when we're in season, the team GPA is high. When we're out of season, the team GPA takes a slow. I think that's like that for all athletes, because you're just so locked in on everything you do when you're in season, when you're out of season, and when you're hurt, the whole year's out of season.
Right. Well, there was a great line that William had, which was, when you don't tighten one screw, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, that kind of him noticing that attention to detail, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what needs to be done in his routine, in his life for success. And when you don't take care of each screw, it falls apart. So I thought that was a good line.
One of the things
Mature line.
Yeah. And I think William actually always was very mature. Like, in some ways, he's a horrible subject, because he's so well-mannered and so quiet, and he doesn't really let you in too much.
Right.
You know, like, so as a subject, you'd like, I want to hear, like, I want to hear you rip your coach. I want to hear you,
Right.
like, comment
Sure.
on your family or just everything. But he, you know, William is too nice. He's
Right.
too, and then partly, and that's why the coach thinks he's not a good enough basketball player, because he doesn't have the
Right.
killer instinct
Right.
and stuff.
Well, it's funny because Arthur isn't good enough because he doesn't have the focus and the attitude, but he's the one who does that kind of stuff.
Right.
But William's too nice, and he
Right.
doesn't have the killer. It's like neither.
Yeah.
Like maybe if you just like combined William and Arthur
Yes.
together, it'd be like the perfect basketball
Yeah.
player.
Or if you just let them both be, and kind of like you
Right.
see in Arthur's case, like they'll get there. I think you know, I think back in the '90s, or like everything was about coaching to make them tougher. Like if you make them tougher, they'll be able to handle it more.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely like Coach P's like philosophy, is just be tougher, make them
Right.
tougher, make them meaner. If they get them meaner, they'll be better. When it's like, I feel like nowadays it's more like coach them to give them confidence. Like
Yeah.
let them believe in themselves and see what you get,
Was
not
that what it
just
was
beat
like
them down.
as an athlete for you in the 90s?
Yeah, I mean probably up to the 2000s, like late 2000s, when you could really beat kids up still. Like, but yeah, no, it was definitely like, you know, break them down, build them back up more like me. Where now you're like build them up to be the best versions of themselves. But you
Yeah.
know, that's not really what Coach P was like. And I think, you know, one of the things I think is the most telling, and as a coach, the kind of thing that stung me the most was late in the movie when William was kind of said, like, I had no one to go to with when I had real
Right.
problems.
Yep.
And that is the problem. Like, you can be tough on players, and Coach P certainly was,
Yeah.
but they got to know at the end of the day that you have their best interest at heart and you're there for them. William obviously didn't feel that way. He didn't tell them when he was going to become a dad.
Yeah.
He was afraid like they would judge him or kick him off the team. And
Right.
like you said, I never felt like I could talk to him because he probably was so scared that they were just, he knew they were using him, and if he always needed to feel useful. If
Right.
he didn't feel like, if he was presenting them something that made him seem less useful, he wasn't going to do it.
Right. And Pinagor,
Pingator.
Pingator, thank you. Pingator just like told him, write him off. And he's
Yeah.
like, what kind of advice is that?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, yeah. So
I
it's-
definitely feel like that exit interview when William knew
Yeah.
he was done with Pingator and he didn't have to be nice anymore. He
let it
he
slip-
held
let the
back.
mask slip a little
He held
bit.
back, but he was like, yeah, he's like, I'm going to get a communications degree so that when you ask me for
money, I know to tell
donations,
you no.
I'm going to know how to say no. I was like,
Right.
that's about as mean as William's going to get.
Yeah, no, but it was telling. But funny thing was is that Pingator had stuff to say too, or he's like, he just never really bought into the system. Like
Yeah.
he just never really like. I'm just like, are you kidding me? This kid like, you know,
Rehab
like
for a year straight.
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears for you, man. And
Yeah.
like, he's like, I just never really bought into the system. That's why.
Right.
And
Yeah.
again, that's kind of a way for Pingator to pass the buck.
Yeah, it's not me, it's you.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So definitely, you know, definitely part of that. And you know, one other thing I'll touch on William too is, and I think you know the doc is able just to kind of touch on this because of this long storytelling. But I love one of the scenes with William when he, you know, he's a dad. And he's going to be a great dad.
Yeah.
I hope he was his whole life. I hope everything worked out for them because you know obviously we don't get to see all that, but it seemed like he was a great dad, even though it was he was forced into fatherhood at a young age. But you know, learning through his father who wasn't around, and we see I think in one scene. In
Yeah,
the
he's
movie.
in like one scene. Yeah.
But you know, William's going to be a great dad. But you know, he has a scene at the table with his eventual wife, and he's like, you know, talking about how he wasn't going to see the birth of their daughter because he had a basketball game.
Right.
And she was like trying to tell him like basketball is not everything. He's
Yeah.
like, yes, it is. Like this is my only way out. And she's right there saying like, I'm from the same neighborhood you are. I have a daughter. I'm still going to college. It's like.
Yeah.
There are other ways. You just have to devote yourself to it, and just sometimes it's so hard to see that when everyone's telling you like this is the way.
Yeah. Well, and it does seem like, you know, as the movie progresses and you kind of we're getting into junior and senior year, and these, you know, the next steps are looming, you know, because
Yeah.
obviously this whole movie is, you know, supposed to be centered around these two kids that are, you know, trying to fulfill their dream of making it to the NBA. So it's like, well, what's next? You know, and obviously, you know, because of St. Joe's and because of his record at St. Joe's, William obviously gets a lot of upfront
Yeah.
attention. You know,
Yeah.
big schools, like his mom's like, I get 2 or 3 packets a week from
Yeah,
different
that
schools.
made her so happy.
Right, yeah, you know, and rightfully so. You know,
Yeah.
she's very proud of her son. You know,
Absolutely. He's
whether
getting
she's thinking
recognized.
of the, oh well, this could lead to the NBA or not, whatever. She's just, you know, she sees a kid
Yeah.
who is you know, having to struggle and claw in, you know, in Cabrini Green,
Oh yeah.
you know, to try to make his way out, and you know, they're coming to him.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah. As far as we know, William's still going 3 hours, round trip
Yeah.
to school for 4 years.
Yeah.
He did that.
Yeah, and they're coming to him. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I totally get her being proud of that. And but then Arthur, you start wondering like, well, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna make it? Because obviously
Yeah.
academically he struggles the whole time, but then he does start kind of getting interest from like junior colleges and
Yeah.
stuff. It's like, okay, well that's something,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Well, and what's funny too, because like Arthur, like the way the doc portrayed it, like he he didn't really think he was ever going to reach his potential. Like
Right,
he looked good on the on the neighborhood courts,
right,
like on the
yeah,
streets. Like he had confidence there, and the coach kept saying like he's not focused, or he doesn't have that play with that kind of swagger. And I'm like, man, he's got the swagger when he's playing with his friends outside.
right.
But how do you bring it to structured, in-game basketball? You didn't know if he was ever going to do it. And look, senior year, he did it. He wasn't
Yeah.
just like the backup, or he turned into like, debatably the best player on the team.
Right. Well, and that's kind of it's interesting, that they both of these kids, obviously they started senior or freshman year at the same time, so you get to end their senior years at the same time
Yeah.
in two different places, but on the same journey, if
Yeah.
you will, like in the tournaments, trying
Yep.
to get downstate, as they say, and obviously, William has a harder ending,
Mm-hmm.
as far as high school, which from the beginning of the movie you wouldn't expect.
Right.
You would think, okay, this kid's going to go places.
Yeah.
And
And he's such a good kid.
and he is. He's such a good kid, but just the team in general,
Yeah,
like they
just
just
isn't
don't.
there.
It just isn't there,
Yeah.
and they don't make it.
Yeah.
Whereas Marshall ends up becoming kind of like a little bit of a underdog.
The giant killers.
Right? The giant killers, and they end up taking off the first round and going down, and then they win the city tournament,
Yeah.
and they go down state, and then they win the first round, and then I think they lose in the second
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, because I think it was 8.
Yeah,
4.
they finished
they
third
lost
in the
final
state.
four.
I wrote it. They
Yeah.
finished third in the state.
Yeah, so they lost in the final 4.
Right. So I mean that's
And their team stunk the year before. They were
Right.
6-14 or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I
but-
think I'd written it down. It was like the first time they had gone in like 31 years or something
Yeah.
like that. It was a long
Yeah.
time, like
Yeah.
since 1960 or something
Yeah.
like that. So I mean, it was big deal, and so he kind of Arthur does somewhat realize that potential
right.
that everybody saw in him, that never really came to fruition at St. Joe's,
They
and
gave
then
up
kind of
on
struggled, right, and then kind of struggled with earlier
Yep.
in Marshall to kind of like get it up there, but he finally gets it, and so then he is able to go to school, but they both kind of they have to get their ACT scores, William and Arthur both, which again, William goes to St. Joe's and he's still struggling to get that ACT score
Yeah.
that he needs to get,
Even though he had that great academic improvement his ninth
Right.
grade year, what did they do with him after that?
Right, exactly. So but they both get it, and Arthur ends up going to Mineral Area Junior College,
Yes.
and William ends up going to Marquette.
How did you like the college recruiting process as they kind
I-
of dip Williams' toe in that?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I mean, obviously, I'm very little. I have no experience.
Yeah.
I have no experience with that. So yeah, you would know more about that than I do. You as far as like how. Obviously not accurate because this is a
It's
documentary.
accurate.
It's
Yeah.
accurate, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean. But just
It's
like,
outdated, but it's
right. Yeah, I was gonna say
because-
with that, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's definitely outdated, but like it was interesting how like Marquette was like super, hard in the paint for him.
Yeah.
For William, whereas they had kind of said like the recruiter, I think said some of them had like the other schools were gonna wait and see
Yeah,
like,
how he
his
played his
senior
senior
year
year.
went,
Yeah.
but it didn't matter. He ended up going to Marquette anyway.
Right,
So
he loved it there, and they actually did a great job recruiting. I kind of loved like when they in-home visit when the coach is like, Curtis is smart and actually asked some great questions, and he's like, how many guys are you recruiting? He's like 7. It's like, well, what happens if or for 3 spots? 7.
Right.
He's like, well, what happens if 3 people commit? He's like, well, then William's out of luck. He's like,
Right, yeah.
what happens to me if he's like, what happens to me if William says no? Like, I can't be like, I don't have anybody to replace him. If
Yeah.
like it's. Yeah, it is first come first serve basis. That's it
Yeah.
is what it is. I kind of like that. Arthur or William goes to Marquette. He loves it. Like they put on the scoreboard and the fake newspapers and everything. But then he comes back. He's like, yeah, just talking to Coach P, and he's like, hey, I want to go to Marquette. And instead of Coach P being happy, he's like, you're just gonna, you need
Right.
to wait on it. Don't like you're
wait a couple days.
you don't know what you're doing. You're just
Yeah.
kind of, you're just, that's just like the girl you dance with last is the girl that you like the most.
Right.
It's like sometimes like Coach P, like just say great job.
Right.
Like just
Yeah.
be there for the kid a little bit.
And again, like I think we talked about parents earlier.
Yeah.
in regards to sports and your coaching career. But let's talk about other coaches
Sure.
and how those guys sometimes live through
Definitely.
their players. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like them, obviously, and it's not like it's not understandable that, let's say William went on to, start for the Chicago Bulls or something
Right.
like that. And, obviously Pingatore would be super proud about that. But it's also like they also put that pressure on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Oh,
mean?
for sure.
Where it's like you need to reflect well on me, and like you getting there is what is going to reflect well on me. It's not about you. It's about me.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying.
Or when you play bad, it makes me look bad.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so, like in a situation like that, it's like, well, he's like, well, Marquette's fine, but you could go
Same.
here.
Yeah.
You
Same
know
thing.
what I mean?
Yes, the same thing that I think Bo was had when Arthur was trying to go to Mineral Area Junior College.
Right.
Arthur's
right.
dad's like, you could kind of tell in that scene, which was very awkward because
it was awkward.
There was. We'll talk about that in a second. I want to jip Marquette, but yeah, I do think I do think Pingatore wanted William to wait to see if he could get a little bit bigger school.
Right.
But that wasn't going to happen, and I do agree. I think coaching it's tough. It is a tough balance because you want to put pressure on kids because they're gonna feel pressure in games. When there's when there's a minute to go, like, and William saw this his junior year, like he had to make 2 free throws to send his team to downstate.
Yeah.
He just had to make 2 free throws, but that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And he missed them both.
Yeah.
And William kind of blew it.
Yeah.
It's a team game, and those last 2 shots shouldn't be what defines a game, but that's certainly what it's going to feel like.
Yeah.
But and so that's why you put pressure on my practice. But like again, like there's constructive pressure, but there's a different pressure when it's more like you're reflecting bad on me, or I'm thinking you make me look bad. Like that's that's the wrong end of coaching. But yeah, that super awkward scene though. The same idea where Arthur knows where he's at in life at this point. He's very self-aware. I think Arthur's a little bit smarter than the way he looks on film, because I do think he plays to the camera a lot. Like, it's awkward. Like, you're in high school and there's a film crew filming you in the middle of your 4th period. Yeah, and the teacher calls on you. Like, yeah, you're going to be a little embarrassed, and so he doesn't answer a lot of the questions when they call him in class, which kind of makes him look, I don't want to say dumb, but it makes it look he doesn't know the answers when maybe he's just too shy at that moment. But by the end of his senior year, he's got a really good understanding on what life is like, because he's lived a tough one. Like, he's battled through these first 4 years we've seen. And he knows, like, I think deep down he knows, like, Mineral Area Junior College is a good setup for me. It's going to allow me to keep playing.
Yeah.
They're letting me in.
Right.
They're going to pay. They are going to pay for it.
And Sheila, I had it written down here. Sheila asks all the right questions.
The ones that we think she might not have asked.
Yeah.
When she's going to St. Joe's, she asks now, which is, there's a full circle arc for her.
Yeah.
But then you have Bo, Arthur's dad, who they're separated again now at this point. And I was really kind of, when Bo was winning me over, like he looked like such a, like everything was going so well for him after his drug deal.
Right.
And you can tell it's very awkward. And the documentary, like the narrator comes in and says, like, Arthur did not want Bo here.
Yeah.
And you can see it all over his face. And that's not a great look when your college coach is trying to sign you and you just are in a bad mood. But but anyway, long story long, Bo was kind of felt like he was trying to talk Arthur out of it.
Yeah.
He's like, you don't have to go there to this like podunk school in Missouri.
We'll go somewhere bigger. We'll pay for it.
We'll pay for it. We'll go for the hole. And Arthur's just like,
the look on Arthur's face. Like, it was one of those realest moments for him in the whole.
You couldn't pay for me.
Like,
you couldn't pay for me to go through high school. You're not going to pay for me to go through college.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I know that this is what I need to do. And he does it. Good for him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mentioned Sheila, a minute ago, and like this is kind of, we're obviously the movie's about William and Arthur. So at this point, they're, making their transition. But I'm going to take a quick second and give a massive shout out to Sheila, because man, when she goes to nursing class, and this scene got me. I'm not gonna lie, man. I was almost in tears, because she thought, she goes to this nursing class. She has to get a certain grade to be able to pass and be able to get her certificate or her license or whatever. And she gets the highest grade in the class.
Yep.
And when she's told that, she just breaks down crying. It's like, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could do it.
Yep.
And man, like I said, almost started bawling.
Yeah,
right
I
there
want to jump through
myself.
the screen and give her a hug too. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
she's, and you kind of just feel like, what does this mean for them, for their family? Is she going to
Yeah.
be able to get off welfare? Is she going to,
Yeah.
be able to maybe move into a better
Right.
location and just,
Chuck
just
Bo,
feel
just
so,
Chuck Bo, and be like, I don't
yeah.
need you. Jeez, Bo.
Yes, it's so awkward. You don't really even know where they kind of end up at the end. They kind of seem
No,
like
you
they might
don't.
be back together,
Yeah, maybe.
but so good for her. Like, it's just that hard work that that can pay off. And again, the doc is able just to kind of touch on these side stories,
Yeah.
so effectively.
Yeah. So one thing, circling back, I just saw this note. We were talking about Arthur going to Mineral Area Junior College. Like,
Yeah.
one thing I thought was kind of interesting about this, and kind of touching about maybe a little bit of the racial aspect of this. They said like they don't have dorms, but they have the basketball house,
Right.
where like a lot of these players on scholarship live. And like 6 of the 7 black kids on campus live in this house.
Right.
Like,
so 6 of the 7 black kids on campus play on the basketball team.
Right. And so and one kid doesn't live in this house, but he goes to the school. It's like, there's a problem here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I understand like it's not segregation per se. These kids need a place to live, so this is where they're
Right.
going to live, and they're all on the basketball team. But it's just like, they're got to get that enrollment up, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's what junior college is about. Sports is that.
So it's but I thought that was kind of an interesting element to this, that I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know if that would be like, that wouldn't be a sinker, like on the recruiting pitch. I'm not like, hey, we're going to stuff you in this house.
Right.
And
but again, they
That's
need a
where-
place to live, so I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. But just, I don't know, it felt weird.
and
But
they said the JC doesn't have dorms, so basically,
Right, right. I
and
get that.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, it is. It is what it was.
Right.
But yeah, it seemed like a weird living situation. But Arthur's like, I could do this.
Yeah.
And he does it. So
Yeah.
good for him. But yeah.
And it's but so they kind of end up, they both end up going to college. William and Arthur both end up going to college, but it seems like at this point, in the headspace they're in is very different
Yeah.
than where we started.
Yeah, I think there's this beautiful, like, storytelling that they're able to accomplish with this long form, because we literally see these kids basically as 8th graders going into high school, and everything is just NBA. I want to
Right.
be it's just dreams. It's just fantasies. It's just hopes and prayers, and then we see them graduating high school or going into college, and the world's beating them down a little bit.
Right.
They've been introduced to the real life. They haven't just peeked at it. They've lived it. They've seen it. They've stared it in the eyes.
Right.
And they're not the same. Like William says, like, I could see myself not playing basketball, not just
Yeah.
not going to the NBA. Like, I could see myself not playing
If
basketball.
I stopped right now, I'd still be happy.
Yeah. And Arthur still is like, loves basketball. He loves to play basketball. It's his escape. Where like for William, basketball wasn't as much the escape anymore. William, I think, even states like, basketball feels like a job now.
Right. Yeah.
Which it is. I
Yeah.
mean, it is. When you're at that level, if your thing is like you're doing this to make money, then yeah, it's a job. That's what a job is. It's to make money.
Yeah.
Where Arthur, I still feel like he got, because maybe the public school was just a little bit looser structure, he got to play with it still more as a game. I think still thinks of it more as a game, or at least, as I said, his escape from his life.
Right.
Yeah.
William had a great line where it's like, I don't really dream about it like that anymore.
Yeah. It's
And
not
I
his
think
hoop
that,
dream anymore.
Right. And I think that's such a.
And he's got a daughter, so
right,
too, and you can
again,
tell
his
like that's the
whole
thing.
life has
Yeah.
changed. Yeah, I mean, and that just kind of, it really does kind of go to show, while this movie is about the dream of becoming a professional athlete, for these 2 kids, it was possibly to get them out of their bad living situation, save their families,
Yeah.
whatever. But I do think there's a universality to this about the evolution of a dream.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whether it's about sports or whether it's about anything.
Absolutely.
And like you don't realize how 4 years can change your life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
how you think you are right now, in 4 years, the differences that you'll see will probably blow your mind.
Absolutely. I think,
Especially
yeah.
at that age.
Oh, especially at that age. That's why I think this movie is probably I don't know if there's a better example, because this is real life,
Yeah.
of just like seeing boys turn to men, like
Yeah.
just and not the straightest line
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
But like you said, that dream, that the movie's called Hoop Dreams, right? And how you see those dreams change over time, very slow. They get chipped away at, chipped away at. It's special. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's a special film for that.
Well, it is, and the other aspect of this for them is, and this kind of plays into what is William's last line, I think in the movie that I have written down, and it's just this idea of, you know, they're going through this, dream of being through the NBA, again, kind of to save, as we said, this dream to
Yeah.
save themselves, save their families, whatever. But I think there's also that element of it of just to be somebody.
Sure.
They talk about, in various parts of the movie. I remember for Arthur's 18th birthday,
Yeah.
His mom even says, "Well, he lived,
Right.
like he lived to be 18."
Exactly.
Like, I mean, that's that's a big deal.
Absolutely.
For in this place, in where we live, like
Yeah.
that's a big deal. And I mean, it just kind of shocks you.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like,
And imagine,
yeah.
the 90s too, like crime was a little bit different
And-
back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so William at the very end, kind of reflecting on that, people are like, oh, if you make the NBA, you're like, don't forget about me. And William's line is, well, yeah, but if I don't make it, don't forget about me.
I love that line.
Like,
and it's like somebody wrote that for you. That's too good. But I don't think so. I think that's just honestly, that's a fear that he has. Like,
Yeah.
Well, because it's kind of like when people retire from a job, or even
Yeah.
when professional athletes retire. Like, this is what I identify with as. This is what I identify myself with. If I'm
Right.
not this, what am I? And
Yeah.
that's what I think Williams kind of, that's what he was kind of slowly coming to grasp with. But kind of one other thing I'll say too that I love about the thing about that birthday scene, and we kind of talked about sports, and I do think we in some ways we not talked negatively on sports, but we have the movie does kind of show us how when it turns into a job, and when your coach is like doing his version of what he thinks is going to make you the best, like it could make it not as fun and tough and lose some of that magic. But I do think the movie also shows the other side too, where when you see like Arthur's team going on that playoff run and they're pulling
Yeah.
off these big upsets, and Arthur's playing great, and you see his dad cheering for him, and
Yeah.
and there's after this one win, I can't remember which one it was because there was a couple big ones that the team had. I think maybe it was one where they won the city, or no, probably I think that was an easy win, so maybe it was one before that. But like you see Arthur like go and hug his mom for like 30 seconds. Like, he's just fully embracing her and smiling and crying.
Yeah.
Well, on his birthday, when everybody was singing, when she made him that cake, he took it and was going to go eat it in his room by himself. He's at a birthday party with 10 other people. He's going to eat it by himself because he's more shy. He's more like introverted. Like, at least when the camera's on him like that.
Right.
Or like when people said like sang him happy birthday, he just kind of like looks down. Like he can't he doesn't come across as someone who just says I love you as he walks down the hallway all the time.
Right.
But in that moment through basketball, he can go up and hug his mom. Or that's when he told his dad, I love you. And his dad says it, like, I haven't heard him say that in a long time.
Yeah.
Like, sports can bring that and give that to you and let let that stuff come out. I think
Sure.
that's the good side of
Take
sports.
pride in yourself.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's the thing. I think it allows
He knows
you
his
to-
hard work has paid off.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Rob. So like we said, sometimes we do have questions. We didn't really ask any questions here about Hoop Dreams because, it is a doc and stuff. And, it doesn't like have built-in themes. Like it touches on a ton of stuff, but it's just like stuff that naturally occurs. So we didn't really have a question, but I have one. I thought of one like while we were talking.
Oh man.
All right. Here's my question for you. Which kid did you like more, William or
Oh
Arthur?
no, you are kidding. You are not going to ask me that question. I'm not going to answer that.
You like them? I like
them
I like
both.
my both.
Are you
I like
kidding? I
both.
like
my
them both. I
kids.
like them both. Yeah, seriously. No,
Yeah.
Arthur.
You get really, I
and
think
William
you're
are
proud
both
of both of them by the end of the movie.
Absolutely. Well, and as we said, like it's two separate journeys, and they respond in two separate ways, and both ways are understandable.
Yeah.
And I think I think both having the fortitude to overcome what was thrown at them to get to where they are at the end of the movie, because that's the thing. It's not like they won a championship. It's like, yeah, they go to college, which is a big deal, but William goes to Marquette and Arthur goes to Mineral Area, which may not seem like a big deal in the grand scheme. Definitely not where you might think. Beginning of this documentary, you think, oh man, this kid's gonna go,
Right.
Duke, yeah, North Carolina,
Yeah.
whatever. And no, like he goes to Mineral Area
Right.
Junior College, and like that's okay. for somebody coming from where he's coming from,
Yeah.
like that's a huge deal. He just climbed a mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I think as the movie says, he then actually turns that into a scholarship to Arkansas
and then he goes
State.
to Arkansas State.
And then after that, he ends up playing professional basketball in Canada.
Oh,
so,
did
like,
he
ends up being a professional
See,
basketball
exactly.
player.
Yeah, so there you go. Like,
Yeah.
Arthur did it. Like, I mean, it's,
He absolutely did.
You know, obviously William burns out,
Yeah,
like,
William
in
burns
college and ends up dropping out, which is awful. But, I mean, he has his family, he has his wife and his daughter, and hopefully, like you said,
he gets married.
Yeah, they were, able to make things work, and that's the journey that they're on. I mean, we're all on a journey, and it's trying to make the best of it while we're on it. And
Actually, real quick, something that I forgot to mention earlier that I love when they meet. Like, it feels like when they meet. You know what I mean? Like, late in the movie, I felt like it was like a crossover. I'm like, William and Arthur?
When William and Arthur
meet. Yeah. When they get to, like, hug each other out.
Right,
it definitely felt like they know each other more than the doc made it seem.
I bet they were interacted way more in real life than what you saw on camera.
Because they kind of say, like, hey, man, love you, boy, or whatever. I'm like, you've never met this man before as far as I know.
Right.
But I guess they did go to school, like, pretty much that whole freshman year together. They
and especially during that time, I'm sure that they were interacting off camera, like being the two kids that have this documentary crew following them. So I'm sure they did.
Okay, well then here's the real question, and this is the question we always end the podcast with.
Okay.
Rob, did you like this movie, and would you recommend it to people?
Well, Ray, in the parlance of this movie, this was a layup.
Oh, God. I'm the pun guy.
Because, man, I loved this movie.
Cool.
Like,
I was afraid it would be too long.
I was blown away by this movie. Like, the journey of Arthur and William is just so incredible. I mean, like I said, and it's not like they ended up, like I said earlier, winning state championships, going to the big schools, all this stuff.
It wasn't the Remember the Titans sports movie endings.
Ultimately, they ended how it was very real, and that's fine because again, like they're on the journey of life, and this is where it took them, and they still overcame.
Right.
Like they still overcame just to get where they were.
Absolutely.
And I think the filmmakers, like you said, if you want to call it luck, whatever. They were able to latch on to these two kids for this period of their life and really capture the struggle of humanity. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? To find yourself, to deal with your dreams, to deal with your family, to deal with all of those things, everything that life throws at you, the ups, the downs, the failures, and to come out the other end standing tall. I mean, is an achievement for anyone.
Yeah, and to be able to watch that happen is, to me, it's special every time I see this movie. I'm glad that you thought the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, this is a pinnacle of documentary filmmaking. It's what makes documentary filmmaking worth doing, worth watching.
Absolutely,
it's something like Hoop Dreams.
All right, Rob. Well, I'm glad that Hoop Dreams was a slam dunk for you.
Nice.
Have you experienced any other slam dunks recently? What you been watching?
I had yes and no. I'm going to say yes and no. So one thing that just finished up recently was Yellow Jackets, which I know you don't watch.
I don't.
That is a show that I simultaneously am into and I hate because it's like
this Cobra Kai disease.
Kind of, yeah, where they kind of slow walk their seasons. They were a little bit better about it this season, I guess, but like I still think like there was some stuff that just didn't necessarily make sense. But the problem was they always hit the last episode to make you like, well, now I got to watch next season.
Yeah.
God, like so they're really good at that.
Yeah, they got the hook.
Yeah, so like the premise is still there, but I feel like there's certain elements of it they're unwilling to fully commit to. Some of the supernatural side of stuff, like I don't know. But all the performances are great. Like all the actresses in it knock it out of the park. Like they're all wonderful. Melanie Linsky is fantastic. Christina Ricci is next level as always. And so it's unfortunate But I will obviously be watching
Yeah,
next season as much as I might
I've
seem dour right now.
I've never seen an episode of that show, and it frustrates me just from listening to you talk about
Yeah,
it. So
absolutely. So another thing that I watched, and I had mentioned this to you recently, Criterion released a movie recently called JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling.
yes, the Richard Pryor
Yes, it was written, directed, and
movie.
stars Richard Pryor, and it's such an interesting semi-biopic.
I'd love to see a biopic from him.
Yeah, well, so he plays JoJo Dancer, like that's
Right.
his name in the movie. But I guess he had written this movie after he set himself on fire in
Uh-huh.
like 1980 or 81. And the funny thing about that is there's like it's a bit of a contradiction about how it happened. Uh, so it's like he either doused himself in alcohol and lit himself on fire, or accidentally blew himself up trying to freebase heroin or cocaine or whatever. The cops say one thing, he says something else.
Neither are that flattering, so
right, no,
just go with whatever.
Right, exactly. But yeah, so he plays himself essentially, and kind of him coming up in comedy and stuff like that. It's a brisk movie, you think of a modern biopic where it's like, it's a 2.5 hour epic about this,
we just talked about a complete unknown.
Right, exactly, right. And it doesn't necessarily feel like that as much. It's a little bit faster than that, so the pacing is a little weird, but man, Richard Pryor is just so good.
I love him.
Yeah,
we talked about him in The Toy not too long ago.
Exactly. Check out that episode if you haven't listened to that. But yeah, so but I highly recommend it. Is it perfect? No, but Richard, it feels like the most personal thing Richard Pryor ever made.
That's cool,
and I think that really shows. Another thing that I watched is Common Side Effects.
Oh yes, I've watched Common Side Effects too. I love it.
Yeah, well, it is so good. It's right. It scratches that Adult Swim animated series itch.
That's a good way to describe it.
It's such a smart show. It's such an interesting visual show. The music is fantastic. The voice talent is great. Mike Judge obviously executive produces and does a voice.
He knows what he's doing.
But his character sounds like Hank Hill sometimes, which is kind of distracting, but also hilarious.
I think I settled into it.
Kind of looks like, and he kind of looks like him too, which is funny.
But he's completely different,
right?
So
I
think you can settle into the voice because it's so different, or because the character is so different,
right? But for the audience, it's a show about a guy who discovers a mushroom that can supposedly cure everything, literally everything, death even. And there's a lot of pitfalls to that, though. You're like, oh man, this is an amazing thing, but there's a lot of pitfalls to it.
And I think that a lot of the pitfalls were smart. It wasn't just big pharma wouldn't let you do it. Obviously that's true, and that's a big crux of the story. But a lot of the other side of it's really smart and well done too.
Yeah. So I was super into that.
Me too.
So
check that out, people. That's
definitely
a great show.
Highly recommend it. Cannot wait for a second.
Or at the very least, watch that one clip online of the two police
of the Capano and Harrington Capano dancing. Oh my god!
Check that out on YouTube.
So good.
It's about
I would watch
a minute and a half clip.
Over again.
Yeah, it's worth it.
So we just had WrestleMania.
Yeah.
So, and as everybody may or may not know, Ray and I are wrestling fans and have been
sports entertainment fans.
Sports entertainment, exactly. And Peacock just dropped in coordination with WrestleMania a documentary about WrestleMania 9.
Right. I watched this.
Yep.
We watched this as kind of a warm up to WrestleMania.
Exactly. So it was a pretty cool doc. Obviously, as a young wrestling fans at that time, also a lot of the classic wrestlers, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
The Head Shrinkers were in it. All of that. Obviously, Hogan is in it.
This was kind of like this is almost kind of like a dark time for me, where I was just probably falling out of love with wrestling. But this has maybe been where I kind of started to fall and then didn't come back till Steve Austin era. So I like seeing some stuff that fills in the gaps a little bit.
Definitely, yeah. But it was interesting because it was the first Mania outdoors.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. It was also the first one in Vegas.
Yeah.
That's where this one was. This one that just happened was. So it's kind of cool, to see that connection.
Yeah.
But yeah, in some of but it was also the first time that they had ever recorded behind the scenes footage.
Right. And back then you had to you were still pretending it was real in some ways.
Yeah. And it was really funny to see the wrestlers in these behind the scenes footage where they're like, am I supposed to still be in character or not? They were
Yeah.
very awkward. You
Right.
could tell that they're not who they portray themselves to be on TV. They're much more awkward, much more weird, and they're just
Yeah.
like,
Is this
what?
business or
What am
what
I
is
doing
this?
right
Am
now?
I
Why
gonna
are
get in
you
trouble
here?
if I act like myself?
Right. So that was kind of interesting, but obviously, you know, Hogan's an asshole. And this documentary just continues to prove
Yes,
that.
and that WrestleMania he was in rare form. So it's funny to hear that backstory because I've heard stories about that for a while. So it's you know, Bret Hart talks about it quite often if you go to many YouTube videos.
And he's very bitter in this documentary too. So.
I know. At one point he's like, "Yeah, nobody has screwed me more than Hulk Hogan did." I'm like, I've seen like 8 movies about how Vince McMahon, like, the Montreal Screwjob is literally the name of the thing. So I'm like, I don't know if that holds up, but
yeah, absolutely. But it was worthwhile. So if you're a wrestling fan, especially from that era, that like early '90s, you know, mid '90s era of wrestling, it's definitely worth checking out. Very nostalgic.
Yes, I agree.
But what about you, man? What have you been watching?
Still, you know, working on some series that'll be wrapping up soon, so we'll be able to talk about those. But you know, because one of those series I've been watching is on Disney Plus, I kind of decided to clear out my Disney Plus queue. You know, like sometimes I like to just attack one platform at a time.
Sure.
So I knocked out some Disney Plus stuff this week that had just been there. I watched Moana 2. I'm a huge fan of Moana 1. I think Moana 1 is great. Moana 2, though, is not it for me.
Most times the sequels aren't.
Yeah,
Disney sequels aren't.
And this was a sequel that was supposed to be like, it started off as a series, and then they, somewhere in development, they turned it into a movie. Now this is
good.
No, I mean that is kind of I think the process of what happened with Toy Story 2, or no, it was Toy Story 2 was just going to be an at-home release, and they decided to make it a movie,
good
a theatrical
call.
release.
That was a good call.
So this is different because I think with Moana 2 you can see the seams a little bit. Like you can see like this was supposed to be the end of an episode, or this was the tag scene at the end of an episode. So you can see some of the seams a little bit, and then you know Lin-Manuel Miranda did not come back for the music, which that's a huge like trying to get somebody to recapture that vibe is just that doesn't quite work.
Impossible.
So you know, wasn't bad, but there just was nothing interesting. There's nothing super engaging that like let me, you know, that made it as memorable as maybe the first one is. And then kind of the same deal. I watched Mufasa, and I heard a lot of good things for Mufasa, and I'll agree. You know, I probably think it's better than Moana 2. It's definitely better than the live action remake of Lion King.
There's a live action remake. You want to call that live action? I'm kidding.
Touche. That's. I mean, you're right. It's not live, and the animals don't act. But so it was better than that. But again, like nothing that like super got me bought in. Like the story is mildly interesting, how they kind of shaped the Mufasa Scar stuff, but like I don't know, just missing a little bit of magic. It you know, at the end of the day, for me, it's pretty forgettable. It's just like that middle of the road. You can put it on while you're scrolling on your phone, but it's not gonna rip you off the phone, make you put your phone down and stay engaged. I wish it was, but it just wasn't for me.
Got it.
All right, Robbo, as we wrap up this conversation on Hoop Dreams, the time on the clock is ticking. We are almost done, but the fans still have an opportunity to get a buzzer beater in there to beat the clock by liking, subscribing, and reviewing this podcast before it's done. You got to do it right now, though. You got to hurry up and get that stuff in.
Yep.
If you leave us a 5-star review in time, we will read it live on air someday. And if you also want to reach out to the podcast in different ways, you can email us at carrayrob@gmail.com or reach out to us on Blue Sky at carrayrob.
Exactly. If you want to do a mid-court bomb, leave us a comment.
That would be awesome.
On whatever platform you were listening on. Let us know what you thought of Hoop Dreams. Tell us what your favorite doc is. Maybe something else that we should check out. A new documentary that I have not seen, Ray hasn't seen, something great we should check out. We will be back next week with this month's Hello Movies, My Old Friend, where we will be watching the Chevy Chase comedy Modern Problems.
That's right, we will be.
Yeah, and it's
been a while.
It has been a minute since I've watched Modern Problems, but I remember really being into this movie as a kid, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of stuff in it I completely did not get. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But then we will be back in 2 weeks with May's first episode of Say Hello to My Little Film, and it will be back to me.
See if you can get me to like a movie.
I will. I have something I'm pretty excited to show you. I think you're going to like it. I think everybody else is, so you're not going to want to miss it. But until then, this is Car Ray Rob.
Where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob. And remember, be defined by the films you love, not the ones you hate.
Hey there, it'll be just a little while till Ray and Rob spit their spittle. Come on, check out of the hospital. So grab some of your best peanut brittle. This will be a darn good transmittal. And say hello to my little film.
Hey everyone, Rob here. I want to give you a little sneak peek of what my first May episode of Say Hello to My Little Film is going to be. And that is going to be the 1984 rock and roll fable, Streets of Fire, directed by Walter Hill. It's a very interesting movie. It feels like something all unto itself. You're not going to want to miss it. It stars Michael Pare, Diane Lane, and Rick Moranis in a rare, almost villainous role. So you're definitely not going to want to miss it. Check it out, and we'll see you then.